To start off with, I'll talk a little bit about pedigrees. As Angus breeders, we all know pedigrees, we all study pedigrees. Even though, sometimes our environments are different and our markets are different, and for some of those reasons, our cattle may be a little different, they're all connected in terms of their pedigrees, Angus cattle. From an academic standpoint, all of us that have training in animal breeding and genetics, we also track our pedigrees. In many ways, Dr. Ravagnolo and I are siblings, if you will, in our academic pedigrees because we were both trained partially at the University of Georgia. Dr. Guiteau was a classmate of one of my major professors, Keith Bertrand, at Iowa State. I was trained partially by a professor I'll show you in a little bit named Ignacy Mistal, originally from Poland. It is very much a global community. And Ignacy, in turn, was trained by Dr. Gianola. Dan Gianola is here, a very proud Uruguayan, but it was a real treat for me to see him. I don't know how many of you know Dr. Gianola, but as a young graduate student, some of the first papers I read were some of his work. If you've ever used a genomic test in cattle, beef, or dairy, if you've ever used a calving ease EPD or any kind of categorical EPD or a trait that's not continuous, uses what we call the threshold model, Bayesian statistics. You have with you here one of the real pioneers, one of the greatest animal breeding professors of my lifetime. So it's very good to see you, Dr. Gianola. Give him a nice hand, please. I was asked to talk a little bit about our experiences with genomic testing. And as you're well aware that American Angus breeders have very much adopted this technology. And it's really just the next technology. It is really a fundamentally different approach, but it's just a more powerful way of making the decisions that we have always made as Angus cattle breeders. It's just another source of information. Just as moving from weights and ratios to the first EPDs was a transformative technology, and using selection indexes was a transformative technology, genomic testing is the next thing. And there will be another next thing. I don't know what the next thing will be yet. My crystal ball, if you will, is not that clear. But I know there will be something else that comes along. Maybe it's some sort of gene editing. Maybe that'll be the next. But the technology will always continue to evolve. And it's our challenge as breeders of cattle to make the best use of the best technology to breed better cattle. And the more that we can share our experiences, learn from each other, share information, in some cases learn from each other's mistakes, perhaps, I think that we can all advance our breed and our society through sharing that information. Some of the things that I'll talk about today, this is just a brief outline of some of the things that I'll address. It's just that, genomic testing for our breeders has really become a standard operating procedure. It's something that many breeders do, and many breeders test all their animals now. And they do that because the accuracy of the EPDs that results is significantly increased. I'll talk a little bit about how the data collection is just as important as it ever was. Sometimes I've encountered breeders that maybe have thought or maybe have been told, well, if I can get a drop of blood or some hair, I don't need a scale. I don't need to measure my animals. It's all right there. Well, it is there, but being able to know what's there depends on the data. And we have to continue to measure, to phenotype the animals, to make more use of this information, to make the tools even more accurate. Dr. Guiteau talked about the Angus GS test and the HD50K for Angus. We've worked with genomic labs to build the next generation of genomic tests that incorporate markers that are shown to be more predictive, more significant for Angus cattle, and we'll talk about that. One of the most interesting things we have going on right now is using this information. We've used it well in seed stock herds, but extending genetic information to commercial producers. Commercial producers that have used bulls with genomic tests to inform their EPDs, they want to take that technology now into their herds and do heifer testing. And we have a new initiative at the Angus Association I'll talk about to help use genetic information to describe the value of feeder cattle. Not necessarily today DNA testing those cattle, but using the pedigrees and the EPDs of the bulls to put a rating on groups of feeder cattle so that the cattle producers that buy the best bulls get a premium for their calves, which makes them want to come back and buy better bulls again, right? It's all about bringing transparency to the marketplace, that not all black calves are the same. And so trying to bring information there. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about some of the things we're researching now related to fertility and the bovine genome. Dr. Gateau again talked about the bovine genome project, and now we're starting a project of our own, assembling that information to help build the next generation of tools. Some of you know about AGI. AGI is part of the American Angus Association. It was a separate company, if you will, that's owned by the Angus Association and its members. It was created in 2008 to do our own in-house genetic evaluation, our own EPD calculation. Angus had a long, successful history, first with Iowa State University, then with the University of Georgia, and then back to Iowa State to do the evaluation. But we saw that as universities were changing, our business was changing, there was a need to bring that into our own shop, if you will. And so in 2008, this company was formed by the association. I have a very talented team that I get to work with, people like Steve Miller and Kelly Ritalik and Duke Liu that are geneticists. Dr. Miller spent a little time here in Uruguay speaking when he was at the University of Guelph and was previously employed in New Zealand when we hired him away and brought him back to North America. The group in the second row is part of our information systems team. And what we do in terms of in-house genetic evaluation is only possible because of them. People like Jason and Luann that have a long tenure with our association. Marg, there on the far right, has worked for the American Angus Association for 50 years. Her hands have touched literally every EPD we've ever generated. So she's a real asset. You talk about the value of longevity in the cattle business. There's value in longevity in the association business too. So I'm very lucky to work with a very talented team, some very talented customer service representatives. These ladies answer the phone, answer breeder questions. Why did my EPDs change? When will my results be back? Why does this cost so much? All those sort of things. You never get those questions in any other country, I'm sure. But again, a very talented group of people that I'm lucky to work with. And finally, giving credit to the folks at the University of Georgia. The software, the computer programs that produce the Angus genetic evaluation as well as that of our other customers is written and supported by Dr. Mistal, Daniela Lourenco, who's originally from Brazil, as well as Dr. Masuda and Dr. Saruda. A really powerful team of people that support us. The same software runs genetic evaluation in other species and other countries all over the world. And so it's a wonderful partnership that we're lucky to have. AGI does the Angus evaluation, and once that was set in place, the folks before me said, we've got the ability, we've got the computer programs, we've got the know-how, let's extend that to other organizations. So not only do we calculate Angus, and we calculate a North American Angus EPD, an EPD that's combined databases from the United States and Canada. So it's a partnership between the American Angus Association and the Canadian Angus Association, but their data and our data is merged together, and we produce EPDs that are comparable on either side of the U.S.-Canadian border. But we have other clients like the Charolais Association. We calculate the EPDs for American Charolais, for Canadian Charolais, for Senepol, for Maine Anjou, and hope to grow that more in the future. And then, of course, genomic testing is a big part of our business, working with companies like Neogen and Zoetis. We generate a lot of numbers. We describe animals, and that's our mission, is to describe animals as accurately and completely as we can. In the end, the breeders need information, and we try to describe those animals as well as we can for more and more traits all the time. And it looks like a lot of numbers, and it is a lot of numbers. There's more to come. We're starting to evaluate some new unique traits. We recently released EPDs for foot structure. That some breeders have told us that some Angus cattle have some issues in terms of longevity because of hoof growth and foot structure. And so we now have EPDs for foot angle and for claw set, some of those structural things. We've got a research EPD for something called pulmonary arterial pressure. It's blood pressure, but it's a response to altitude. There's probably not very many countries where Angus cattle live above 2,000 meters, but there are significant parts of beef cattle production in the United States where Angus cattle do live above 2,000 meters. And in that environment, some cattle adapt much better than others. They survive. Other cattle don't, that they get a condition that leads to heart failure. And we now have an EPD based on data collected in those high mountain ranches that is predicting survivability and productivity in a high mountain environment. Now, if you're here in Uruguay at a fairly modest elevation, very close to sea level, that trait doesn't matter to you. But if you sell bulls into the very high country of and maybe some other countries too, then that's interesting information to know. You know, that trend will continue. We're looking at cow longevity. We're looking at meat tenderness. So there'll be more and more things coming down the line as we're able to more completely characterize cattle. If it impacts the profit of our customers and we can describe it, then we want to. Because it ultimately, if the ranchers that use Angus bulls are successful, then our members will be successful. Dr. Horatio talked about the growth in numbers, and we did start pretty modestly in 2011. That 2,000 number, I don't even put that up, but that's where we started. We started in a very modest position. But over time, our breeders have learned that there's real value in genomic testing. When they started, it was much more expensive than it is today. The first 50K type genomic test cost almost $140. Now it's less than $40 on the U.S. market. So we've seen a reduction in cost, and as the population grows, the accuracy of prediction gets better. And so, you know, if you're a country that's just beginning your genomic journey, you know, go ahead and make some investment. Those genotypes will always be useful. That information will always be useful. The cattle that we tested in 2012 and 2013, you know, at the time, those genomic EPDs were not as accurate as the ones we have today. But they built the foundation, and the reason that the values we have today are so accurate is because of the work we did and the investment that we made, you know, almost getting close to a decade ago now. So that investment will always pay off, and I'd encourage you to start down that path if you've not already. It really is, this is a little bit about the cost reduction. I don't know how many of you ever seen one of these Illumina chips. So that's about the size of a business card. If you take a business card and cut it in half the long way, that's about the size of that. And this first bovine 50K that's been available for about 10 years now, that would do 8 animals. But over time, everything gets smaller. Remember when cell phones used to have to hold with 2 hands, or anybody ever have one in a bag? You know, I'm starting to show my age now. There's some young people that have no idea what I'm talking about. A phone in a bag. Yes, a phone in a bag. Well, it's the same way with this, that the first bovine 50K from Illumina, you could do 8 animals. And that's pretty amazing that you can get DNA results on 8 animals for something that's about that big. But then the next generation came along and they could do 24 animals. And the Illumina XT, which is what the Angus GS runs on, actually does 96 animals in that same sort of assay. So, that's part of the reason that the cost is reduced, and there's efficiencies in the lab as well with sample handling and those sort of things. So the technology advances, and over time we'll have new chips with new traits and new markers selected, as well as other things that we'll be able to do to help you get the information to breed better cattle. As I mentioned before, though, the DNA tests by itself without data really don't tell you very much. That we have a few breeds in the United States that we work with on genetic evaluation that want to do DNA testing, but they haven't built a database of birth weights and weaning weights and yearling weights. And without that database, along with the pedigrees, that's what it takes to have powerful genomic tests. And I appreciate the ongoing commitment of our breeders and Canadian breeders, whose numbers would also be included in these totals, because they continue to take birth weights. They stand out in the mud and the rain and the wind to weigh that calf, and they pay the ultrasound technician to come scan the cattle. That ongoing commitment, that commitment to data collection is, in my mind, and I think in a lot of our breeders' mind, an obligation of a seed stock breeder. That to be a truly committed seed stock breeder that is committed to the success of your bull customers, you have today an obligation to characterize the animals you're selling as accurately as you possibly can. And that means being faithful and accurate and complete in data reporting. And as much as it would be nice to just take the DNA and be done, we know that over time, not only if that was our approach, if we stopped collecting data, not only would the technology not get better, it would actually decay over over generations. If we stopped collecting weights and measures and carcass data, reproductive data, the accuracy of our tests would actually decline. And so that's an important part of being an Angus breeder in the 21st century, is a commitment to objective data collection. Another project we have going on right now is an update to our economic indexes. When I think about EPDs versus indexes, I think about EPDs are like the engine of the car, okay? And we have the fastest, most powerful engine we've ever had. We have an engine that can go as fast as you probably want to go. The indexes are the steering wheel, okay? If you have a really good engine, but not a very good steering wheel, you're not going to get to go where you need to go. You'll get somewhere, and you have more opportunity to get somewhere very quickly than you ever have. But it's important to have a clearly defined direction, priorities, understanding the fundamentals of the economics of profitable beef production for your customers. For the person that comes to your farm and buys an Angus bull, what makes them money? What do they need? Sometimes that's not what you like, but you have to put yourself in their position. They're trusting you. They're oftentimes not an expert in genetics. That's your job now, as an Angus breeder, to be an expert in genetics. They've got lots of other things to worry about. They've got pasture management, they've got marketing, they've got other crops, they've got other jobs. You're the genetic expert. They're depending on you. So the better tools you can have to take EPDs and turn those into wise decisions, the better off we'll all be. And so that's where we are with Angus. We've had indexes. Some of you have heard of $B, which is a terminal sire index, or $W, which is a profitability index. It's turning EPDs into dollars, into money. And we're in the process now of updating those using better models. In cooperation, we've got a company out of New Zealand, Abacus Bio, that's really one of the best in the world, helping us with that particular project. But that's where we're going, that we wanted to have better tools so that in the end, Angus breeders and their customers can make the best decision for their environment, for their production system, but to understand the trade-off between traits. That we've shown, for example, in the Angus breed all over the world, that you can have fast growth with easy calving. When I was a student in the 1980s, we used to have arguments about whether that could even happen. Can you really do that? Can you really have a calf that is born light and grows fast? We don't have that argument anymore. The argument today is, can we have a fast-growing steer with a moderate, efficient cow? That's a challenge. But that's a challenge that I'm sure we'll achieve, but we have to have the data. We have to have performance measures on growing cattle, and we have to have more measures of mature cows, the weights of mature cows, so that we can identify the bulls that are both most efficient in growing, whether you're growing on grain or whether you're growing on grass, but reach maturity at an early age and maintain affordable cost of production in the cow-calf part of the production system. So that's something we have going on, and you'll see more about that, and I'm sure many of you have similar sorts of things going on. But I would encourage you as an organization that if you've not developed selection tools, selection indexes, those sort of things, that those are things that you should really be thinking about in your organization. We shouldn't be using the same one all over the world because, again, our markets differ, our environments differ, but we should all be trying to help our members. You know, I realize the people here are the leaders of all these world organizations. We have a saying in the United States that you're preaching to the choir. I think people understand what that means. I'm here preaching to the choir, but I'm telling you, when you leave Punta del Este and go back home to your home country, to your home organization, carry that message that selection tools are needed and they'll help your customers be more successful. I mentioned a little bit about the Angus-specific genomic tests. Again, I show my age when I think about when I was a student, what I thought this business might look like in 20 years. And I would never have dreamed that we would be testing cattle with genomic tests at the volume that we are. I didn't see that. And I never, even 5 years ago, wouldn't have thought that we'd be able to build something specific for Angus. But, you know, the first generation of genomic tools do work very well. They have worked very well. But those assays are built for not just Angus, but all breeds of beef cattle and all breeds of dairy cattle. And there are some markers where all Angus cattle are exactly the same. And so we've chosen, working with Neogen initially and also with Zoetis, to select markers that are most variable, what the scientists would call polymorphic. There's more variation in Angus cattle than other markers, and we can learn more from those. And over time, we'll add those to our genetic evaluation. We'll also be looking at some tools related to fertility, which I'll talk about as well, that we know that we can use DNA tests to detect some sequences which may cause embryonic loss of the embryo, and the dairy breeds are already doing that. So that's another project that we have going on. These are available globally, and we have partnerships with several of the breed associations that are now using the Angus GS, the Canadian Angus Association, Australian Angus. I start naming and I'll forget somebody, but for example, Neogen is running the Angus GS assay, not just in the lab in the United States in Nebraska, but they're running it in their lab in Australia, their lab in Brazil, and I think if they're not already running it in Scotland, they plan to. Zoetis as well makes their tests available globally. So in some ways, that's an opportunity to learn from the things that we've learned from our experiences and our research, so that as these tools evolve, that there'll be things that really the global Angus community will be able to access. I mentioned this idea of genetic evaluation of commercial cattle. Again, that's sort of the next step, that as our breeders' customers, their bull customers, that they've been buying now for a couple of years, in some cases, 5 years, buying bulls with more accurate EPDs. And that experience has been very positive. They have less calving difficulty because the calving EPD is more accurate. They get a cow herd with mature sizes closer to what they expected because the mature cow weight EPDs are more accurate. And that informs the indexes, and so the indexes are more accurate. And so the breeders ask us, okay, now that I'm using this on my bull selection, how can I use it on my heifer selection? Now these are commercial breeders. They're not registered breeders. They don't generally have pedigrees. Oftentimes the heifers result from multiple sire mating. They're turning out multiple bulls. They don't even know any given heifer who their sire is. But we can use genomic testing there as well. And so we've built a test in conjunction with Zoetis we call GeneMax Advantage. In Australia, they have a product called Heifer Select, which is a very similar approach, where we can take the knowledge from Angus seed stock testing and we can build a test that can work in commercial heifers without having to know the pedigree, without having to know anything else. It's a DNA-only test. It's not as accurate as what we use in our genetic evaluation, but it's still a big step up for a commercial producer. And we have a number of commercial producers now that faithfully use that product. And they are seeing more rapid improvement, particularly for traits that are hard to measure on the ranch, on the farm. Breeders that want to improve carcass merit, because in our country we do have a grading system where we're rewarded for more marbling, more we call prime carcasses, and CAB carcasses, certified Angus beef. Dr. Belk talked about some of that this morning. And so they're seeing a profit for that. They're seeing, because they're using not only genomics in bull selection, but also genomics in replacement heifer selection, that if they own the cattle all the way till they sell them for harvest to the packer, they're seeing a bigger check because of the genetic selection. Again, that's a good return on investment to them. The other tool that we've just launched in the last year is something called Angus Link. In our country, it's most typical, and again, every situation is different, but most of the producers that run what we call a commercial cow-calf operation in the United States, they would be selling their calves at weaning by auction or by a private agreement to a feeder who is going to buy those calves and then feed them out until they go to a packer. And so how do you get paid for better genetics if you don't own the calves all the way to the processor? That's a challenge, and it's been a challenge in our business for a long time. We have breeders that have faithfully used the best Angus genetics. They've stacked pedigrees with multiple generations of marbling genetics, for example, and gain genetics, so that they have some of the most efficient, most profitable steers in our industry. But because they didn't own those cattle all the way to harvest, they didn't get to reap the benefit. And so this program we call Angus Link is striving to bring more transparency to that market. What we're doing at the association, that a commercial producer that uses Angus bulls in their breeding program, they can enroll their calves in our program. In our computers, we already know what bulls they've purchased, because the bulls have been transferred from the breeder to the commercial producer. So those calves then can be enrolled in a program, and in our computers, we pull in the EPDs of the bulls they've purchased. And based on that, we put a number on the group of calves, not on an individual calf, but on a group of 50 calves or 100 calves. And we provide that rating for feedlot performance, rate of gain, what we call grid, which was marbling and leanness, and then a total score, what we call beef score, which combines the two. And that informs the feeder about the genetics of the calves. He can see that these are black calves. He can see that they weigh 600 pounds, but he doesn't really know the genetics behind the calves. But we know, the seller knows, and so we're a third-party verification of genetic merit. And in that way, we provide that documentation that the seller can provide to an auction, to the marketplace, and then they can be rewarded for the superior genetics that are provided in those calves. And we're just getting that program started, but to this point it's been very successful. The calves with those ratings have well outsold the average of calves sold that particular day, and we're very encouraged about that. We think, again, that creates more incentive for commercial breeders to buy the best Angus bulls, both just bringing more transparency to the marketplace. The last couple topics I want to talk about is some of the things that are coming in the future. That there's more things coming, there's more tools, more knowledge that we can gain from data analysis, and particularly from genomic testing. And so one of the tools that my team back home is working on, Dr. Miller and Dr. Liu, are working on is something that the dairy industry has already learned from, is already benefiting from, and soon that Angus breeders will benefit from that too. And that's understanding the genomic underlying some of the causes of embryonic loss. Everyone in here that's ever bred an Angus cow has bred that cow, had some cow that you thought was pregnant. Maybe you confirmed with ultrasound that at 30 days she was bred, and at 60 days she was riding. Yeah, I've had that feeling too. Yeah, it's frustrating. Why does that happen? Well, there's a lot of reasons why it happens, but one of the reasons that it happens is basically embryonic loss due to some lethal genes that exist in every population. They exist in humans, they exist in cattle, they exist in pigs, they exist in plants. But with the technology today, we're just beginning to start to identify those. This is actually, I know you can't read this, but this is a list of the ones that have been identified by our government research agency along with a lot of university collaborators in Holstein, Jersey, Brown Swiss, Ayrshire, the major dairy cattle breeds. And in Holstein, they found about 5 or 6 that they have identified. And if you go to a semen catalog from Select Sires or Alta or ABS or Gen X, and you pull up the Holstein bulls, along with the pedigree, along with the PTAs like the EPDs and all that information, the indexes, they'll say which ones carry certain what they call fertility haplotypes. Okay? How do we know that they're there? Well, with all these genotypes that we have stored in our servers now, 600,000 animals, we can look through that DNA and we'll find a sequence, a chunk of DNA, if you will, that maybe, a few thousand or a few tens of thousands of animals have once, but no living animal has it twice. Well, if a significant number have it once, but nobody has it twice, why not? Well, maybe because it's lethal. And so as we have more samples, we're more accurately able to confirm that those exist. And so then we can label those, and breeders can make those in their mating decisions. Now, when we tell you that an Angus bull has one of those, does that mean never use the bull? Absolutely not. But now there's an opportunity to also test your cows and to not mate a cow and a bull that have the same issue. Because a lot of them will have one. Just like in Holstein, a lot of the popular sires had at least one of these haplotypes. Over time, they have reduced the frequency, and so they've eliminated. But this trend is pregnancy rate in Holsteins. And you can see what happened. It's been going down for a long time. And all of a sudden, for really the first time since they've been measuring these things, Holstein is actually seeing an increase in pregnancy rate. Okay? You're all familiar with heterosis, and you understand that, while we're proud Angus breeders, we understand the reality that there are some advantages to crossing. One of the advantages to crossing is that each breed has these sorts of things, but they all have different ones. And so if you cross an Angus and a Hereford, for example, you're less likely to have an issue with this. But if we can identify these in purebred Angus cattle and lower their frequency, we can help breed purebred cattle that are close to as fertile, perhaps, as crossbred cattle are. So it's one of the opportunities for us. That'll take a lot of education for breeders to understand that and to use that information. But there's a real opportunity coming, and that's just another benefit to genomic testing. The only way to really get at this is to do genomic testing. But I'm very excited about the future of breeding Angus cattle, because that's just one more way that we're ultimately going to produce Angus bulls that our customers will take to their farms and be more successful. The last project that I'll talk about is something that we're just beginning, what we're calling the Angus Genome Project. Horacio talked about the bovine genome project that happened 15 years or so ago, and that's what led to these tests that we have. These 50K type tests led to this from this study of the bovine genome. All over the world now, lots of different universities, research centers have done now this sequencing of genomes of Angus bulls, and in some cases cows. Used to be very, very expensive. That sequencing that first Hereford cow years ago, millions of dollars invested in that. Now we're talking about, in some cases, depending on how much resolution, how fine you do the mapping, you might be able to sequence a bull for less than $100. Is that a good investment in a bull that's going to sell a lot of semen? Probably so. And I think you'll see a whole lot more of that. There's a chance to do things like identify some of these embryonic things, other genetic conditions much earlier with that information, as well as just verifying the pedigrees, just like we're doing with SNP parentage and that sort of thing. But we've already been able to assemble from publicly available information all over the world about 275 Angus bulls that have a 10x or better genomic sequence. And our board has made a significant investment in storage and computer disk space and other ways to store that information so that we'll have a repository there that'll be available for researchers that want to drill into that and make more use of that. So that's something this is Steve Miller's slide. He said, we've 275 highly influential animals. You guys know Angus pedigrees. Anybody recognize that bull? Traveler 23-4, QAS Traveler 23-4, bred in Alberta many years ago. That our analysis of our genotypes would say that if you pick of the American Angus cattle that have a 50K type genotype, and you pick one of those at random, any one of those at random is going to be about 10% him. On average, he contributes 10% of any given animal in our population, in our U.S. population today. It would vary across the world, but he's as well known as probably any bull that's lived, and his contribution is ongoing. And so, he's a bull that has been sequenced, and as we learn more about that, we'll be able to put that to work for more accurate genomic tests, more accurate, better chips that would be the next generation of Angus GS and HD50K for Angus. So that's another project. And it's something that we're doing, but we welcome partnerships. And as other societies, in your country, there may be sequences that have been done by researchers in your countries that we can't access, but you can. Maybe it was funded by your governments. And if you're willing to share that, we're going to keep this, but we're going to make it available to researchers all over the world. And so ultimately, it'll be just another advantage to Angus cattle over some of the other breeds. Because we're the largest breed, because we have some of the most progressive producers, and because we've made such investments, we have some real advantages. And this is an opportunity to take advantage of that investment and build better tools to continue to accelerate the progress of the breed and breed the next generation of Angus cattle. So with that, thanks again for your attention. I'm really looking forward to the questions because I think that'll be really fun to hear what you all are thinking. I always enjoy coming to these international sorts of meetings and meeting breeders all over the world. Give a shout out to my Kalapa brothers, several of the folks here that have been part of the Latin American group there, and it's good to see Alvaro and many of you folks as well. And think about how we can work more together. That's what the Secretariat is about. How can we work more closely together, benefit each other, continue to advance the breed and our businesses and our customers? That's why we're here together. And so be thinking about that, and let's keep those ideas going. Thank you.